who have lost family members and loved ones to the Q conspiracy. But you're not limited by that. You also talk about the wellness industry.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
um, I would like to ask you, you entered this space by having the experience of your parents getting into QAnon.
Yeah.
And I just want to ask, when did you notice something was wrong?
Um,
The first indication, like, okay, this isn't your run of the mill thing.
yeah.
When did you notice something was really, really wrong?
It was when the vaccines rolled out for COVID. My mom had always been like into like alternative medicine and stuff like that. She had like distrust for big pharma, which is deserved. Let's admit it. But
Sure.
she was very fearful of vaccines for a long time, but there was never any reason for it to come out and be a part of our conversation until COVID came around and the vaccines came out. And so my brother and I started to urge my parents to get vaccinated, and we were pushing them to make an appointment, and we kept checking, did you make your appointment yet? Did you make your appointment yet? And of course they kept having excuse after excuse after excuse. And so we finally confronted them and we're like, are you like, what's the problem here? What's the real problem? And they proceeded to send us an email, the infamous email, that was about 5 or 6 paragraphs of just truly unhinged nonsense. And my brother and I, like, we were texting each other. He doesn't live in the same province as me, so we were texting each other, and he's like, "Holy crap! Did you see their email? They are full on QAnon." And so it just kind of it went from there.
I see. And how long into the pandemic did they seem to really take a dive? I mean, how long? Because I remember, you remember, I was laughing with my husband, okay, I'll be able to work at home for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Hooray. 6 weeks, 8 weeks top. This will be over by summer.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. And
Mhm.
so people who study conspiracy theories talk about how it's conspiracy theories rise up in times of uncertainty and fear.
Yes.
And so I think the fear really, it was a lark, let's admit it.
Mhm.
And we ran out of toilet paper
Mhm.
and everybody laughed, ha ha ha. The world is collapsing and Americans want their toilet paper. I mean,
Yeah.
you gotta admit that's a little funny.
Yeah.
And then I remember I would take pictures of the empty shelves, but really I wasn't worried. I'm kind of a weirdo prepper-ish gal, but I
Mhm.
prep for the inevitable flu and laryngitis and tonsillitis that I get every year. Like,
Yeah.
but I haven't for 3 years. But every year I get this. So every August, September, I just gather all the stuff that I'm going to need when it inevitably hits. So I'm that
Yeah.
kind of a prepper. So we had toilet paper, like we had this stuff, and so it was kind of amusing, really. And these people buying piles of toilet paper, and these social justice warriors would chase them with their cameras, going, "You're stealing toilet paper," you know.
Yeah.
And so at some point we transitioned from toilet paper panic to they're trying to kill us.
Yeah.
And where do you think that happened? I mean, I told you what I think. I'm talking
Yeah.
too much. You're the interviewee. Like, that's a problem. You can't shut me up. That is such a problem. But anyway, go ahead, Courtney. Tell
It's
me.
great when you have a podcast, but it's it's so like I've thought long and hard about this, because when your loved one is in this mindset, that's all you can think about sometimes. And my mom, like growing up, my mom she's always had this need to feel like she's in control of how long she lives, her health. She's always needed to believe that she can control when she dies and all of this stuff. And I think ultimately the pandemic became too scary for my parents to kind of handle, and they needed something to believe in that was less scary. And it's, when you think about the pandemic, it's a virus. This is something that comes out of nature, right? It's something that we're all susceptible to, and we can't defeat. There's always going to be viruses, and nature is always going to be far more powerful than us. And it kind of reminded us of how we are just at the mercy of nature, right?
You mean
And
we're
so
not the apex predator?
yeah.
That maybe we could go extinct and then the roaches will laugh about these stupid bipedal, skin sacks who used to think they ruled the world, and it really was the roaches.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the roaches are going to outlive us. I did some stand-up
For
comedy.
sure.
I did a whole thing about how the roaches are going to outlive us, and they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that for sure.
So yeah, it is scary. And I think
Yeah.
a month or two in, it got scarier. It was a
Yeah.
lark. It was funny. Then it was scary.
Yeah. And then that's when you started to see people reaching for something that's less scary to give them some comfort. And if you suddenly are blaming the virus on humans created it, and it wasn't nature that created it, you feel like, okay, well, we can defeat humans. That's less scary, right? It's more comforting to think that there's just some evil guy behind all of this,
Yeah.
and you can blame him.
And you can, when you get that guy, you solve the problem. It's the same thing with anti-Semitism. If there's evil Jewish people who are keeping you poor, well, you get rid of them, you get rid of the problem. And of course, and throughout history, there's been, problematic beliefs like that. And I love your insight about the fear, and this is less fearful because the 9/11 truthers, I've always said they're less afraid of the US government doing it than of being that vulnerable.
Yes.
That they really are. The Sandy Hook truthers, they're less afraid of, first of all, in their mythology, the kids aren't dead. So first of all, that they undo the death of the kids, and they say it's all fake and pretending, because that kind of it's so much safer to believe that.
It's very hard to admit to yourself that we are that susceptible to anything, any of the evils that are out there. It's hard for a lot of people to face that and say, no, that's real. We are vulnerable. And life is really luck,
But it's also a survival of humanity overall. So it's not just our way of life, that we as a species could be vulnerable. I've heard people say with global warming, the earth is going to be just fine. We're not going to be fine.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd bring up one or two conspiracy theories of times past, just to give us some perspective. Of course, there's the famous one that Nero burned down Rome, the witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries, where they felt that there were women creating a counter religion. In the 18th century, it was vampires. And these are academics who were studying vampires, okay? And in 1790, there was a preacher, Jedediah Morse, who claimed that there was a Bavarian Illuminati who was going to infiltrate American society, trying to undo Christianity and our government itself. So this is not new. This is just part of the human condition. And so when you talk to people, do you notice any commonalities? And I like to talk about susceptibility, because for human trafficking, for cults, for all the coercive control and the dark persuasion tactics, it does need to fall on fertile soil. Like there are usually things going on. So what about the state of the people in all these interviews you've done makes them fertile soil for
There's
for a conspiracy theory?
there are a number of different things. Like I said, I think the fear of death is one of the biggest ones. I
Well,
think
that's what Freud said.
yeah,
Freud and I think the Buddha both say, Buddhism, they both say all fear is based on the fear of death.
yeah, yeah. I think it for a lot of people, like definitely for my mom, it comes down to she's just always been obsessed with youth and appearing young, feeling young, being in denial of her age, and stuff like that. Like she points stuff out to me, like she'll say that I have gray in my hair, like it's some kind of bomb that she dropped, and I'm like, I know, and I don't care. um, but you know, like to her, being young is everything, and I think it's tied to the fact that she just doesn't want to die. And that's what I hear in a lot of the people that I talk to. But also, one of the most common things, I would say it's every single person that I've interviewed except for one, they are a part of some kind of fundamentalist sect of a religion. And that's, you know, a lot of people will say that it's religion is the cause, but I don't think it's the religion, it's the fundamentalist part. Because one of my guests was a devout Christian, and it was her mother who was in it, and her mother had fallen into this very fundamentalist sect. And so it's just, it's not, it's like the extreme. And I think that the people who are in those extreme fundamentalist sects are already open to being led by these ideas, these extreme ideas. And so when they encounter more, it's easy for them to accept them. And then another thing is the wellness community. The online wellness community is kind of a fundamentalism of its own. It's
Oh yeah. You ever try crossing those people, man? They come at you with knives, metaphor.
yeah.
Nobody's come at me with a knife, but
Yeah.
that's what it is. They
Yeah.
it's like very scary to them to upend
Yes.
their worldview. I
Yeah.
had a friend who fell into one of these cults, Life Spring, and she would say, "I am mighty." So I just kind of embarrassed her, you know, said,
Yeah.
okay, this. And so I just basically boiled it down and I said, your philosophy applies to a healthy adult who is financially independent.
Yeah.
That's your philosophy.
Yeah.
Because a kid can't do this.
Yeah.
You know, well, you bring it on yourself. I said there are 6-year-olds who die in war. They brought that out on themselves.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
No.
You know, and she had to back down, you know, and needless to say, that was the end of that. But yeah, it's I think fear is a big driver. I see a lot of people in the anti-cult and anti-QAnon community talking about cognitive tools, like what they need to learn are critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
And maybe, but I think it's emotional. Do you think critical
Absolutely.
thinking skills would help? Because I mean, you're talking about a community already, in the fundamentalist community, whatever religion, there's fundamentalists everywhere, who are already primed to turn off critical thinking. But would critical thinking really make a difference? Do you think that would help?
Well, I think the best way to explain it is like if you've ever been a sports fan of a specific team and they, you know, there's a chance of them making it to the playoffs, and they're in a, let's say they're in a playoff game and they're down by like 20 points or something. The odds of them making it to the end are next to none, but you're still sitting there and you're still watching and your heart is still beating. It's not rational. You know, it's about what you are emotionally attached to. And I know this because my dad, he raised my brother and I literally every single day of our lives, we heard about how crucial critical thinking was. And he taught us constantly about critical thought, question everything. So my dad, and he used
Was
to,
he in that fundamentalist group?
no, my parents were both
Okay.
atheists as well. And they raised us secular. Like they didn't raise us, there was just no mention of religion really in our house at all. So it was a very secular household, and my dad just would talk to us all the time about critical thought and how to assess the evidence. And he was very skeptical of everything. And so it's, he has those skills. He absolutely 1,000% has critical thinking skills. And it's not about what he can reason with. It's about his emotions and what he's attached to emotionally. That's what this is about. I remember him saying this to me. We were sitting in the backyard because we didn't want to be inside because of the pandemic, because they hadn't had their shots and I was worried about them getting it. And so we're sitting in the backyard and we were talking, and we got into an argument about masks, and I brought up a whole bunch of like scientific papers and facts that we knew and all this stuff. And my dad was like, he literally said word for word, "I don't care about facts. I care about how I feel." Just, it's what it is.
Well, talk about unintentionally insightful.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, what would you say to someone who, what would you advise someone who comes to you and says, my parents are gone?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do?
It's usually different for everyone. I think that one of the things that we ask in our podcast is that our listeners and the people commenting on it allow for the interviewee to make their own choices about whether or not they keep that person in their life, because people have their opinions, and they'll always be like, oh, you shouldn't cut them out, and then if you don't cut them out, oh, you should cut them out. And it's crazy. But I think that it all comes down to the person and what they can tolerate. My advice to anybody who's dealing with that is to never sacrifice your own mental health and your own well-being to cling to something that is just, unfortunately, there's not a lot of hope for it. There's the subreddit on Reddit, the QAnon Casualties one.
Yeah,
If
I've
you
read
scroll through that, there's very few people who have turned away from it. Very few people who have been able to change the mind of the QAnon person in their life. And it's just very unlikely. So if it's causing you mental distress and it's affecting your life in a negative way, don't be afraid to walk away. You don't need to keep toxic people in your life, and it can be very painful because like with me and my parents, we were very, very close. And we actually interviewed somebody last night who said that his parents were his best friend. He's only 22, and he
Oh,
said his
that's so
parents
young.
yeah, and he just cut ties with them because they called him a failure and like just broke him down, and he's like, I'm done. I can't deal with this anymore. So just know your limits, set your boundaries, and don't let them cross those boundaries. And if they do, follow through with the consequences. Don't bend for them. Don't make a compromise for that. It's not worth it, because you're not going to change their minds.
I see. Have you ever heard of people snapping out of it? Because I know you had one guest who was into conspiracies and he snapped out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like a lot of the people that I've talked to, had their little conspiracy phase or whatever, like I did too. In my early 20s, I used to read about the Illuminati and stuff like that. But it was more of a fun thing, it was like a what if kind of a thing. It wasn't I'm willing to die for this. um it was just, this is kind of cool to think about.
Well, it's funny.
Yeah.
The
But I
idea,
think,
there's one conspiracy that Queen Elizabeth II was the biggest drug dealer in the world. I mean, I
yeah.
wanted to write a play as if that were true because that's hysterical.
Yeah. That'd be awesome.
That is the funniest thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, okay. And what put you on the journey towards speaking out?
Um, that's just what I've always done. Whenever I have some kind of a, issue going on in my life, I tend to go and talk about it online in either blog format or something like that. But my husband and I actually just recently started a business about a year ago, where we produce podcasts for other people.
Uh,
And we've been talking for a long time about what kind of a podcast we could do for ourselves. And must have been like 8 months we were throwing ideas out there, and then I finally came up with this one because I think that you make the best content when the content is related to something that's really close to home. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Um,
I'm mildly obsessed with this subject. It
yeah,
actually started before QAnon or anything like that. It started with Scientology. I had a friend who was obsessed with tracking Scientology, and then I started following people online, and I found it to be fascinating.
yeah, it
So
is.
yeah, this is why you keep doing it, even though three people are watching. You're like, but I'm really into this, so it's something,
Yeah.
and I'm really glad that you guys found that because it's a great outlet and a great way to connect with other people too. So, what other resources would you recommend people go to who are going through this sort of Q dropped
Mhm.
experience?
I would recommend going and checking out the QAnon Casualties subreddit, first of all, because that's kind of like a forum for everybody who's going through this. And they're, for the most part, very supportive
Hmm.
over there. And then also I recommend um therapy. Therapy is crucial. Like, especially if this is something that has caused a big trauma in your life. Like, some people, like me, I don't feel like it's super traumatic just because my parents are in their 70s. I've had them for so long, and they've given me such a great life. And you know some people don't have their parents for even half that long. And
Right.
so I feel lucky, I feel privileged to still have them in my life, and they have agreed to not talk about this with with us. So we still see each other.
So
It's just
they can
very,
control themselves.
yes, they,
That's
every once in
interesting
a
because
while.
a lot of people can't.
No, I know a lot of my guests, they say that they just can't be around their QAnon loved one anymore because they just can't stop talking about it. And it's, I don't know if I couldn't handle that. I would have to definitely cut off my parents if they did that. But they, like, we had them for Christmas and they didn't bring it up, and I appreciate that. And it allows us to maintain some kind of relationship, which is important for my son because he's very close with them.
Right, right.
Mhm. um but yeah, if that's not your situation, if your situation is actually causing some kind of trauma in your life, get therapy. And also make sure that you have a really good support system around you that are not tied to those people. Um, so that you have a place to go to just be yourself without any of that stuff going on.
And what sort of places would that be? Give me some examples. I mean, I'll tell you my example. Okay, I'm like a weirdo. I go to church and synagogue. Church and synagogue. Like, so, because I'm very religious.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's just it. I am religious. But that's sort of my answer, and then I'm in recovery. But so what, give me some examples for an atheist. What would that look like? I mean, besides like an online forum. I mean,
Yeah.
I know I'm a boomer, whatever, like an online forum, blah, 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 but you tell me, like, what would you do? Would you join a hiking club? I have no idea.
Yeah, that's possible. Like for me, what I usually do, I do it. I swim every morning. So I go to the local pool and then I spend like a good half an hour after that sitting in the hot tub and chatting with all the other swimmers. So it's kind of like a little club that we have there. But also my husband is a huge support. Um
Mhm.
and we are, I mean, we're best friends and we pretty much hang out exclusively with each other. So
My husband and I were like that too. I
yeah.
lost him like 2 years ago, but
Oh, I'm
that
sorry to
it
hear that.
is such a blessing to have had that.
Yes.
Such a blessing,
Yeah.
you know?
It is. It is. It's honestly, I don't know what I would do without him in my life. I think I'd probably break down because it's just, he's so supportive. Like anytime my parents are, they send us another email. That's because that's how they send their theories, is they send it through email every once in a while. Like once every couple of months, they'll send something weird. And you know, he'll laugh about it with me because it's always crazy. and he's just very supportive. And yeah, I think that, you know, whatever your hobbies are, there's always groups and meetups of different kinds out there that are really, really good to meet other people who are not obsessed with that stuff. Because that's what happens when you're obsessed with the QAnon stuff. It takes over your life. You're not going to pottery class anymore, you know?
Yeah. Well,
And
that's the nature of a cult.
yeah,
It's it takes over all your spare time. And it's
yeah,
also the nature of an abusive relationship.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it takes over all your time, and any attempt to reach outside of that is met with a lot of anger,
yeah, yeah.
you know?
We
Um,
also had one guest, Hale. He has a group of friends that he plays Dungeons and Dragons with every Sunday for 6 hours straight. And he makes like the characters in the game. He makes
oh,
people
he's
that
the dungeon
represent his
master.
trauma. Yeah,
I
I
played
think
Dungeons
so.
and Dragons once. It was in 1982, and I kept getting killed. So I said, this isn't for me.
I've never played it, so but I'm curious. I would definitely try. But yeah, that was his outlet and his kind of support group. That's how he dealt with everything. And then of course he also went to therapy. And a lot of people say their partners are what is their big support system. Or if you have siblings, you know, like I have my brother and I, we bond over the crazy stuff my parents send us. And like, um but stuff like that. And then of course if you are a religious, church, go to synagogue, go to
And I'll
temples.
tell you what, and I'm just going to say this. We have atheists in my church, and they know I'm Jewish. They know.
Mhm.
It's like and for a long time I wouldn't even take communion, you know, because I'm like, I'm not taking communion. But then they talked me into it. It's a communal eating of bread, Christine.
Yeah.
Can you do that? I'm
Yeah.
like, okay. Because my husband was Christian, and so that we started going to church there. And he's gone, but they were so there for me, and they love and accept me exactly the way I am. And that's priceless. It really is
Yeah.
priceless to me. So you could be an atheist and go to church. We have atheists in our church.
Yep.
So I'm just throwing it out there. Like, you know,
Yeah,
people
I
go
know
to
lots of
synagogue,
atheists.
very
I think,
welcoming.
yeah. Yeah. Anywhere that you can find people who are going to accept you for who you are and not, you know, expect you to change in any way, that's where you should go and be supported. And um
But you know
it's
what, I do want to put
crucial.
it, what people tend to do is they jump from one high control group to another. So if
Yes.
you're doing this, uh, do several things. Like a tree has several roots, you know, several big roots on those trees to hold them up. So don't go to another group that takes up all your time, wants money, or whatever else cults are known for wanting out of followers, and
Yeah.
and that you could do many things. Like it's not taking up all your time. It's okay to say, I'm going to give you 3 hours a week on
Yeah.
Sundays or Saturdays or Fridays. And
Yeah.
and that's it. So don't fall into the same thing of an immersive experience where suddenly you're in that world,
Yeah.
because it can feel comforting, but it's also a trap. It's the same with abusive relationships.
Yes.
You know, it's the winning you over part, and then it flips once
Yeah.
you're financially or transportation dependent.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's crucial to find healthy outlets, and like exercise is great too. Like going to the
Yeah.
gym is great, and connecting with people, or like you said, a hiking club if there's a hiking club where you live, or going skiing. I know that a lot of people around here go skiing.
Oh,
There's
you're in
all
Canada.
kinds of
Are you in
events.
Canada?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why. Okay. Here,
Yeah.
like we'll go 3 years without snow
Oh,
in
really? It's all
Washington,
covered in
D.C.
snow out there right now.
You lucky guy. That's why the bright, shining light on your face. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very bright out there. Yeah, but I think that as long as it's balance, you need balance in your life, and you need to definitely, I think therapy is also very, very key.
Are there any books you would recommend? Any books that have helped you particularly?
Yes, Mick West's Escaping the Rabbit Hole, I believe it's called.
Mhm.
It's all about how to talk to your conspiracy believing loved
Really?
one.
What does it
Yeah.
say?
Well, he goes through a bunch of the different main conspiracy theories that people accept today, like chemtrails and Morgellons.
What?
It's this. I don't know if I'm saying it right, Morgellons, but I think it's this disease that people have like invented, where like fibers come out of your skin, and you like have these open sores on your skin and stuff like that. Yeah, it's weird.
So they have a theory about this, but I'm taking it they don't have the lesions. Because if you had the lesions, you'd have the lesions, right?
I don't know. I haven't really done a whole lot of research into that one, but I think that some people are actually like it's a mental illness and they do pick at their skin, you know. But
Wow.
they believe, like, I don't know, the government gave it to them or something like that. But he talks about that, and he, like, each one is a chapter, and he talks about the evidence that exists to disprove that conspiracy theory and how ridiculous it is. And then there's also like a couple of areas in the book where he talks about like the tone that you should take with that person, and how not to make them angry, how not to scare them away.
So I've heard people say the tone should be curiosity.
Yes, and also
Like
connect
very
with.
Socratic method.
Yes, yeah, that's a really great another great resource is Anthony Magnabosco. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he does street epistemology, which is essentially he approaches people on the street, and he puts these videos on YouTube with their consent, of course. And he approaches people on the street and he asks them about their beliefs. And like he doesn't say anything about his position at all. And he's very friendly and very like
Oh yeah. But
I'm
that's just an
just
affect.
curious.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know,
And he
I'm
but
sure Charles Manson could be very friendly too. I mean, it's just an
yeah.
affect.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry.
But I mean, the point is though is that he gets them talking about their beliefs, and in saying what they believe, they are forced to think about it more, and the logic behind it. And so he's somebody that's talked a lot about in the QAnon Casualties subreddit, because that's one of the ways that you can approach people is by just being curious and asking. Personally, for me, I can't handle that. I'm not going to give any
Well, if you're
airtime.
emotionally connected to someone, that is so much different.
Yeah.
Now, do you have? I don't know. Okay, I'm sure you've seen. You know, me, the old lady who like hangs out on YouTube like a 10-year-old. So I can't say. Oh, I'm sure you've seen. But Jordan Klepper does this street interview with QAnoners and Trump supporters. And he does that, but what's striking is they no reflection.
Yeah, no, I know.
Okay.
It's bizarre. It is truly bizarre to watch a QAnon or think about this. Like, you know, I told you that my mom will send me emails every once in a while. They're always with a prediction. She's always sending us some kind of warning because something bad's going to happen. So the last one we got, for example, was a couple of months ago, and she said that in the next couple of weeks the world banking system is going to switch over to the quantum banking system, and all of our bank accounts are going to say $0 for a couple of days, but don't worry about it, your money's still there. But in the meantime, you need to get a couple of weeks worth of food because you probably won't be able to buy anything, et cetera,
Which
et
is all
cetera.
sensible anyway. You
Yeah.
should have, I mean, okay, look who's talking here. Okay, take it for what it's worth. But yeah, you should have a couple weeks worth of food. You could
Yeah.
just boom, have the flu. You can't get up. You got to go, you know, you should have that. That's not so bad. So I'm saying if that's the conspiracy, what's the associated fear? And obviously it's not that strong of a fear. The fear is my daughter won't have enough food.
Yeah.
Toilet paper. Don't forget toilet paper. God forbid.
Well, she's sending us those emails because she keeps doing it despite the fact that we've asked her not to. She keeps doing it because she feels as though one of these days she's going to be right. She's going to be able to say, see, I told you. So that's what's driving those emails.
Okay.
And the quantum banking system it's less about the immediate fears, and it's more about, like, my parents have always been kind of left wing and believing in stuff like universal basic income and helping out the little guy and stuff like that. And so this quantum banking system is supposed to get rid of, like, debt, and supposed to redistribute wealth and make everybody be on a level playing field. So that's kind of why they believe in that.
That's interesting because often the journey to Q goes along with a drift to the right politically.
Yeah. No,
But
my
in your parents,
are-
that's not the case. And what's also very interesting is they're keeping those fundamental beliefs, but they're also able to turn off the rhetoric and deal with you as a human.
Yeah.
I was a court-appointed attorney in DC for 7 years, and a lot of my clients were mentally ill and schizophrenic, you know, homeless schizophrenics, basically, who were going to die of exposure or something like that unless they got help. So I would say to them, okay, Kofi Annan stole your millions. You don't even know who Kofi Annan is. He used to be the Secretary General of the United Nations in the like 90s. Okay, but so she was like, Kofi Annan stole my millions. Okay, but you still need a place to sleep tonight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so you
Yeah.
could always bring it down to, yeah, but right now you have high blood pressure. Let's work on that diet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I find that kind of discourse is not happening with a lot of people in their Q family.
Yeah.
Is that your observation? It's like,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, okay, the Illuminati, quantum money, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, you need fresh milk.
Yeah. Yeah.
You gotta pay that parking ticket. Like,
Yeah.
you see what I mean?
Yeah.
What are
Yeah,
your
they
thoughts on
don't
that?
they definitely don't live in the present, you know, and that's fear. Fear is not present based. It's not usually, anyway, unless you're in the middle of some terrible trauma.
Right,
But
right.
it's usually associated with what's in the past or what's in the future or what's coming down the future. And they don't live in the present moment. It's always what's coming, what's gonna happen, you know, the storm is coming, or and it's just always these predictions. And, you know, obviously my mom's predictions never come true, but when you point that out to her, it's just like, it just doesn't matter. It's like she will only count the hits and never the misses, you know what I mean? And
Like gamblers.
yeah, exactly. Like gamblers, or like Chicago or Cleveland Browns fans like me. But it's it's really bizarre to talk to them and to just, it's like they've compartmentalized stuff so well. I don't think I've ever seen compartmentalization that is so effective. You know, like my parents, I've told you, my parents were always left wing. They raised me to believe in human rights. My dad was a social worker and a crisis counselor who fought for the little guy and minorities. And, you know, before the world was even having these conversations, my dad was fighting for Indigenous youth in courts and stuff like that. And like now he believes this rhetoric that's so closely tied to racism and homophobia and all of this stuff. And it's like when you try to connect those two things to him, he refuses to see it. You know, he refuses to see that him now loving Trump is somehow related to being racist or being homophobic. And it absolutely is. Like there's no other way to look at it.
And he's Canadian.
Yeah.
How do they feel about, okay, I did an article on the Queen of Canada, who basically, I did an analysis of her tactics, which really mirror Trump. She's like, I mean, I believe, I'm not a doctor. I believe she believes what she's saying.
Yeah.
Okay, I believe she believes it. Unlike some people in this space, I believe she believes it. But she really takes the rhetoric of Trump, but is more inclusive. Mm-hmm. She has nothing against landed immigrants and things like that, which I find very interesting. Well, she herself is from the Philippines. But how are your parents with that whole movement? Because it wasn't that long ago that some of her followers tried to arrest a police captain, like having coffee in his car just before his shift. And this was like some old lady, right? She was like 68. And then they stormed the police station. I'm like, so how are your parents related to that? I mean, because that really is, it's interesting that they would admire Trump, but the Canadian version of Trump, what's their interaction with that? I'm curious.
I personally think that they are a follower of Romana Didulo. Okay. I think that because some of the in that last email that my mom sent, some of the things that she said, some of the phrases that she used, I did like a Google search and it was all coming from the Queen of Canada. And the other thing that I noticed, which is weird, is that in that viral video of her handing out vegetables and sardines, did you see that?
No.
Yeah, when they went to go arrest the cops, they were all like gathering beforehand and she was handing out a plate of vegetables and cans of sardines to everybody. And like recently my mom has started to swear by sardines as like the new health craze. It's going to cure everything. And that's essentially my mom's diet is like plates of vegetables and sardines, which I'm totally jealous of. If I could get away with just eating that.
It's like, you know, okay, Romana, that's not so bad. This whole arresting a couple, that's not so great. And of course they got the butts handed to them. You know, and I pointed out what's interesting is the rhetoric, because I found this article in a Canadian newspaper talking about a political fight before QAnon ever happened. And it was described in such florid terms, this fight, this battleground, you know, and it was just all this imagery. And it was just this guy standing in front of an office building with another guy. And they're just like, here we are, you know what I mean? Whatever. And I was talking about the Queen of Canada's responsibility, because I said, like, if his followers, you know, the guy standing in front of an office building in this fight to the death, if his followers stormed the police station, he'd have something to say about it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So tacitly, she really is supporting violence.
Yes. And she's also convinced a lot of Canadians to stop paying their rent, their mortgage,
their water bills,
their water bills.
And then they get upset that the water is turned off.
I know. Well, because they've been promised by the Queen of Canada that everybody's going to get free, clean water. And I don't know. It's like they want to believe this stuff so much that they overlook all the evidence to the contrary. And then, all these bad things happen to them. And like, I don't personally think that my mom would ever not pay her bills. But it does cross my mind every once in a while. And I do have the intention of going to the bank, and because I'm on their bank account, and just checking out like what they've been doing and stuff like that, because it was at the beginning of 2021, January, about a year ago. My brother, he did a lot of their investments for them, logged into their investment account and saw that they had drained it. And when he contacted them and said, "Where's the money?" they wouldn't tell him. And so we knew it had something to do with these beliefs that they have that they know we don't approve of. And I mean, we've had many different theories. They went and they bought gold or silver, or they've donated it to the truckers convoy, or but in that last email, when we did the research on Romana Didulo, and we saw the connections between what my mom said and what she's been saying, we also saw that the same accounts have been pumping this crypto coin, quantum dollar. And I want to believe that my parents would not be able to figure out how to purchase crypto, but I think that maybe that's where the money went, which essentially means they've just thrown it away. And I mean, it's not a lot of money, and in Canada, they're gonna get healthcare until they're gone, no matter what amount of money they have. But we do worry about, like, if they ever need like long-term care and stuff like that, they're gonna need that money, and I certainly don't have it, so it's just scary.
It is scary. It
Mm-hmm.
really is scary. How has this shift in your parents affected relationships with other people outside your family?
You mean my parents' relationships with them?
No, yours. Like you have a relationship with your parents and your brother, but has this changed, affected your relationships with others not in your family group? It just seems to me that it would affect trust.
It's definitely, we've kind of like stopped associating with a few people who kind of believe some of the same things as my parents. And like, there's a couple of people here in town. We live in a very small town, so we don't have a lot of people around us, but there's a couple of people that we used to hang out with that we just stopped because they believe all the same stuff as my parents. And there's only so much of that you can take. And yeah, I think like I have a very low tolerance now for anything like that. I still wear my mask, and I think I'm the only person in this entire town who still, besides my husband, who still wears their mask. When we go to the grocery store, everybody else is maskless. And we live in a town that is predominantly retired people. So it's like a little lakeside town that gets really hot in the summer, like 110 sometimes. And yeah.
Wow. Canada?
Yeah.
What part of Canada is this? You don't have to tell me, but I'm like, wow. Okay.
Oh, I'm open about it. It's the Okanagan. It's considered Canada's only desert, and it gets very, very hot here.
Cool. I love deserts.
Yeah. And we have over 200 wineries here, so this is like a retirement destination, and
yeah,
so
I can see that.
Lots of people move here to retire. So we have this predominantly elderly population, and nobody's wearing their masks, and it makes me really upset. And of course, we have a very poor vaccination rate in this town. In BC, it's great, but in this town, it's terrible. So yeah, we tend to keep our distance from most people. There's a few people that, like, we have a friend who's a doctor, and he's always going to get his vaccines. He's always going to wear his masks and stuff like that. So we will hang out with him. He loves trivia, so we go do bar trivia a lot with him. And for the most part, we kind of keep to ourselves, I think, because it's just, I think we learned in the pandemic, everybody learned way too much about each other. You know what I mean?
Oh, really?
Don't you think? Like on Facebook, I used to be able to be friends with everybody in town on Facebook, and I'd log in, and even if I didn't agree with them, it didn't matter. I could just scroll by it or whatever. But then the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden, all of these people are saying crazy things like, racist stuff about China, and stuff about how you're a sheep if you're wearing a mask, and it's just like, I know way too much about you. I didn't want to know these things about you.
I have a friend whose mother was convinced COVID, the shots were bad, and she died.
Yeah.
A lot of people have died. Do you think that there's an age component for QAnon adherents?
I do. Obviously, there's exceptions, but there's absolutely more susceptibility in the boomer generation, because I think, they grew up with the NewsHour on TV. That's the only time you got news. The newspaper and the NewsHour, both of which had high journalistic standards. You had to do your fact checking before anything. Before Walter Cronkite said a word, a team of fact checkers would go through it. And it was the same with the New York Times, the Washington Post. People did their due diligence. And if they ever made a mistake, they would publish a correction the next day.
Right.
Or they would say the correction on the NewsHour the next day. And so, these people, my parents' age, grew up with, when somebody's telling you the news, you believe them. And now anybody can tell you the news in any way they want. They can make websites that look like a real news site. They can make YouTube channels that look like real news channels.
Yeah.
And they can say anything they want. There's no fact checking involved. There's nothing. There's no indication that this is false or misleading or anything like that. And so I think they're definitely more susceptible to believe anything that they see on the internet that's being delivered as news. And there was once when my mom sent us something. She's like, I just read this article about this horrible thing that's going to happen. I can't remember what it was. And, I go to the article, and of course I couple of clicks later, I could find out who owned the website, and it's this dude in Russia. I'm like, Mom,
right.
Like, not that, I'm sure there's lots of trustworthy people in Russia, but
why would they be publishing American English
exactly
websites geared towards Americans? They'd be doing it towards Russians. I watch Russian YouTube channels for how to cook cabbage.
Yeah.
How to sew a little tote. I'm using my spare fabric to sew tote bags. Just give them to homeless people. That's fine. And guess what? It's not in English.
Yeah, but as soon as when they start talking about, when you've got like a Russian YouTube channel devoted to Canadian politics, you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt.
Exactly. There's this saying that when you're interviewing or interrogating someone and they tell you something, everything they tell you, it's like taking a hand and grabbing a chunk of a watermelon. Mm-hmm. Because everything they tell you is connected to all the other things. Mm-hmm. So when you start checking, so I knew this guy, this was many, many years ago, 19 years ago. And at the time it was popular to believe that Mexicans were coming to the southern United States to have babies, so they'd be citizens,
Yeah.
And so I said, well, if that's the case, then the hospitals would be overflowing. Like, if all these Mexican women and foreign women were coming to American hospitals on the border to have babies, well, then those maternity wards would be full. Mm-hmm. There would be a shortage of OBGYNs. And if there isn't, there would be a massive density of OBGYNs. And
Yeah.
that's not the case. So, and he had married an heiress. And so I said, you've got the money now. Fly down there and take a look. And he wouldn't.
Yeah.
I said, oh, okay. You
Yeah.
know, it's not true.
Yeah. Because it's more tied to.
It's the emotion.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
sure.
the feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy. It's much easier to blame the things that are going wrong in your country on some foreign influence than to look inward and decide, okay, there's some things we need to fix.
Benjamin Franklin did that with German immigrants.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're always doing that. The Egyptians did it with the Jews. I mean, you know, oh, they're all over the place. You know, I'm talking ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
You know, they breed like rabbits. They all say the same thing. It's always the same thing. Fear of the other.
Yeah, we had that growing up in so I grew up in a suburb of Vancouver called
lovely
Richmond.
town.
Yeah, I love it, but only looking at pictures. It's just there's so much traffic and it's so expensive.
Yeah, it is insane.
But it's in Richmond, which is where the Vancouver airport is, it's now, I believe, like between 70 and 80% Asian population. And I, you know, when I was growing up, it was predominantly white. And so this slowly happened while I was going to school there and as a young adult and stuff like that. So you can imagine the racist rhetoric that was going on. Oh, they're taking over. They're taking over. And I'm like, I do not mind at all these, you know, anybody coming here, because I personally, I love learning about other people's cultures. And most importantly, I love the food.
Yeah.
But it's just great. It feels like when you go to my hometown now, it feels like you're going to another country. And I love that. It's like you can travel to like Hong Kong without having to travel to Hong Kong. And it's awesome. Definitely worth a visit if you ever go there. The food there is
I'm going
unbeatable.
to now put it on my list.
The food is unbelievable. And they have great night markets too.
That's good. So do a quick overview of your podcast. Do a plug.
Yeah, it's the Q Dropped podcast, and you can find it on any podcast platform. So that's Q-Dropped. And you can also find it on YouTube. We put it on YouTube. And in the new year, we're going to be doing some live events with experts like Mick West. Hopefully, I'm going to ask Mick West to go on. And we're gonna have some experts to talk about like how to talk to your Q and how misinformation spreads and stuff like that. So subscribe to it on YouTube. Just search for Q-Dropped on YouTube.
Courtney, I want to thank you for your time. This has been great, and I cannot wait to hear what those experts have to say about communicating.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you for being here. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.